There are different fire regimes depending upon the type of trees and plant communities we're talking about. And one of the problems with understanding fire from the public's point of view is there's a tendency to sort of generalize about a few types of forests and apply that to all forests types. So one of the common tree species east of the Cascades here in Oregon is the ponderosa pine you see there. And ponderosa pine are found in Arizona and in Montana and Colorado and the Black Hills of South Dakota, for example. And historically, it is thought that ponderosa pine had frequent fires, but not very high intensity fires. Now, I want to add that there's more and more evidence to support that even that idea is not correct, at least not everywhere. So you have even regional differences within ponderosa pine forests. But a lot of the forests in the West are not ponderosa pine. And they did not have very frequent fires. In fact, fires were rather infrequent, and when you have fires infrequently, you tend to have hotter burning fires, bigger fires at each fire. And one of the ways that this is figured out is through the use of tree rings. This is you can see the scars. After a fire, the tree survives. It has a scar left behind, and you can count the rings and figure out how often a fire burned on average in that region. And so that's how a lot of these histories are constructed. However, there's a lot of criticisms of that whole technique that's only come into popular critiques recently. For example, if you're going to do a fire study, you're a scientist that wants to study fire frequency, you want to go someplace where you're going to have fire scars. So a lot of the studies are somewhat biased towards the kinds of places that burned most frequently, which tends to increase the frequency as a result. And there's some other criticisms as well, but that's just be aware that there's that the idea of fire histories is under some dispute right now by different scientists. So high frequency, low intensity fire regimes dominate lower elevations. You just want to think about it as a generalization. You're going to have, as a rule, higher frequency and lower intensity fires at low elevations. But most fire regimes are low frequency but stand replacement. Here's where you can see where a fire burned, and basically stand replacement means most of the trees get killed in an area. So here you can see all these trees are the same age going up against another area that probably burned at some other point in time in the past. And so you get that mosaic. Okay, when we start looking around at plant types characterized by mixed to high severity stand replacement fires, we find that a whole lot of the tree types in the West are characterized by that. Douglas fir, a lot of Douglas fir forests, spruce fir, Engelmann spruce, white and black spruce in Alaska, aspen, chaparral in Southern California, fir forest, subalpine, noble silver fir, things like knobcone pine, Monterey pine, lodgepole pine, western larch, hemlock cedar, even sagebrush and juniper tend to have longer periods, not as frequent fires as in the ponderosa pine forest. So we have this whole ideology out there that based on ponderosa pine forests that doesn't apply to a whole lot of other forest types. To give you an example, one of the places I'm most familiar with is the Northern Rockies up in Montana and Idaho. And this is the forest types in the Northern Rockies. Dry montane forest, that's basically like ponderosa pine and lower elevation Doug fir forests only make up 4% of the forest type there. Moist montane forests, lower subalpine forests, and upper subalpine forests make up the rest. Yet the whole forest policy in those regions is based on that 4%. And they generalize from that 4% that all the forests in the region, if you listen to the rhetoric, are suffering from the same problem of fire suppression and so forth that doesn't really apply to them, or only weakly applies. And here's a map showing that the dry montane forests are just the red areas. So when you look at this map, and if you know the areas, if you know Montana, well, like here's the Bitterroot Valley, and over by Helena, dry ponderosa pine forest there. But most of the region does not fit in that classification. So you can't read all this stuff, but I just want to get one thing. They did a history of, they looked at all the fire histories from the region. And in the dry montane forest, which only makes up 4% of the total forested area, the fire return interval was 31 years. Okay, keep that in mind. 31 years. That's even at the driest thing. When you start going up higher elevations, the mean interval jumps up to 78 years in the moist montane forest, to 70 to 250 years and at the extremes. And then at the subalpine forest and so forth, it goes up even more, 139 and 117 years. The point being is, how long has fire suppression been successful? We haven't been fighting fires successfully for 100 years. So how could fire suppression contribute to big fires in those kind of forest ecosystems? Most people will say that fire suppression, for the most part, has been concentrated at lower elevations and close to roads, and farther back and the higher elevation you get, the less successful it's been. So that's one point. The second point is, most elevation forests are cold and wet, characterized by stand replacement blazes. And then we have all these different forest types, like aspen. Chaparral in Southern California, I mentioned, tends to come as high-intensity fires, not very frequently. And even in the Pacific Northwest, old-growth forests tend to be stand replacement. Even though it's really wet, it might be 500 or 600 years between fires, but it does tend to burn at times. And this is an example. I took a picture here in the Elwha River in Olympic National Park, the wettest place in the lower 48 states, Olympic National Park, and even there, fires occasionally burn. But it takes very special conditions for that to happen, which doesn't happen very often for those things to come together. Now, we have, particularly at lower elevations, probably affected fire cycles to some degree. Logging is altered by removing the larger fire-resistant trees. Livestock grazing has eliminated fuels in some places, or contributed to more fuels, in a sense, by the spreading of cheatgrass. And then we have, throwing in on this whole mix, the effects of global warming and how that will affect things. And with global warming, one of the points that is important to understand is, it's not a gradual change necessary when climate shifts. People have this idea, oh, we're going to get warmer a little bit, a few temperature degrees here and there and so forth. But you can have a very rapid shift. There was a change at the 13,000 years ago where 7 degrees centigrade change happened in less than a decade in Northern Europe. So that could be in store for us. One of the effects of global warmings will be warmer summers, longer heating season, less mountain snowpack, more drought, stress for trees, higher wind speeds, shifts in species composition, and so forth. But most of these things are ingredients for larger fires. And to show you how much this has shifted already, I got this off a USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture site. This is your gardening chart. This is 1990, showing cold hardiness. Look at the dark blue is the coldest region. This is in 2006. Look how little of the dark blue is left. That's not very many years, folks, and that's changed a lot. Now, 1990 to now, when have we been having a lot of big fires all over the West? They basically started around, well, in 1988 in Yellowstone, but have been through the 1990s and the 2000s and so forth. Part of the reason, I think, is that shift in that. Now, but you got to put this in perspective. This is the acres burned per decade in the U.S. And we used to actually have a lot more acres burning in the past than we've had in recent years. So, for example, in 1990, 1929, 1930s to 39, almost 40 million acres burned on average per year. Now, 40 million acres, just to put that into perspective, that was during the drought, during the Dust Bowl years. So that is something you would expect to happen, is to have a lot of fires during a drought.